Okay. 5 lines at the bottom of 53b. This is something we spoke about many times before. We talk about redeeming Meiser Sheni. It's not just Meiser Sheni, it's also Hektish, and there's a few other things we'll learn about that require adding a fifth to the redemption. What does that mean? Is that an inside fifth or an outside fifth? Meaning, if you have 100, if you have 20, the example Rashi gives is $20. If you have $20, you're looking at 25 as a fifth, or is 24 a fifth? 25 means that the fifth represents 1/5 in total. If you look at the total amount of money being transacted, it's $25. 1/5 of that is 5. In English, we call this 25%. That's the typical convention by the what is it? Generally accepted accounting practice, GAP. Right? That's in the stock market. They have GAP. So the GAP we call this 25%. Or is it 20%? What we would call 20%, meaning it's an inside fifth. So is it an inside fifth, a fifth of 100 of 20, which is 4, or an outside fifth, which we would call 25%, which would be 5. Amar Ravina says, Tashma, let's examine this. Okay. So here's the deal. Basically, somebody has he made a donation to Hektish. He gave an item. So the way it works is as follows. If the original owner is redeeming his own gift, he has to add a fifth. Now, how do we know what it's worth? So we sort of evaluate it. The owner says it's worth $20. And somebody else says, you know what? I'll also give $20. So what do? We prefer the original owner for the redemption because he has to add a fifth. Meaning, so he will be giving 25. And we'll soon prove that point in a moment. I'm saying right now it's 25, but you'll see soon it is 25. Okay. Let's see the next scenario. One guy says, you know what? For me, even though it's worth 20, I'll pay 21. So the original owner has to give 26. What does that mean? The 5 represents a fifth of 20, which obviously, by the way, proves the point. It proves that the fifth is an outside fifth, right? And the $1 premium that somebody else is willing to pay, the original owner has to pay as well. So we have 20 for the value, 5 for the fifth, an additional $1 because there's some competing bids that's willing to pay an extra $1. Okay. Next, let's say the guy says Esrim Shnaim. It says worth 22. It's the same story. Habayim Nice and Esrim. The original owner has to pay 27. Okay. The Esrim Shalosh, an outsider says, I'll pay 23. The original owner has to pay 28 now. Why? 20 for the value, 5 for the Chaimish, which by the way obviously indicates to us that a fifth is an outside fifth, right? A fifth of 20 is considered 5. What we would in regular terms call 25% is what we're calling a fifth, and the $3 premium because it's a competing bids. So it's 20 plus 5 plus 3 is 28. Next one, our Esrim of our ball 24. The owner has to pay 29, right? So that's 20 plus 5 plus 4. 4 is for the competing bid of 24. Okay, now we get to Esrim v'chomish. The competing bid is 25. Remember, the value is only worth 20. So okay. So the original owner pays now 30, right? 20 plus 5 plus 5. Now the Gemara explains the fact that there's a competing bid, somebody is willing to pay a higher amount of money, does not change the fundamental value of it. So the Chaimish, the fifth, is counted based on the original 20, not based on the competing bid of 20, of 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. Well, if that's the case, then what does a fifth of 20 mean? 5. That clearly tells me we're talking about an outside fifth, meaning a fifth of 20 is 5. Because the fifth with the principal is the fifth represents a fifth of the total payment, which is 25. Okay, yeah, it's a good proof. You made the point. Okay, Kitanoi. So this is a machlokes tanom. Let's try to. So there's another Gemara. The Gemara indicates as follows: V'yosef chamishisei olav. You add 1 second. Okay, basically Yeah. So basically, a guy gave a horse to Hektish, to the temple fund. Now, obviously, the temple fund has two things to do with the horse. Either they can use the horse for one of their messengers. Let's say they need a horse for practical purposes. They can use the horse for that, or they can sell it because the horse obviously cannot be brought as a sacrifice, as a korban. Okay, so so here the verse says you're redeeming the horse. You want to get back your own horse. You redeem it for the value of the horse plus a fifth. Okay, what does that mean? So v'yotzef chamishi, so what does that mean? You add a fifth, meaning that the total payment equals the fifth equals a fifth of the total payment, which, like we said before, is 25%. Diva Rabbi Yasha, that's the opinion of Rabbi Yasha. Rabbi Yonason says, chamishisai. What does a fifth mean? Chumshi shel keren. It's a fifth of the principal. What we in English GAP we call this 20%. Okay, so it seems to be pretty clear that this is a long-standing debate between Rav Yasha and Rav Yonason. The Gemara here seems to prefer the opinion of Rav Yasha, but it does seem to be a long-standing debate. Now we get to the next question. So we're talking about redeeming a fifth. Now, what happens if a guy does? So obviously the fifth is relevant for Meiser. It's also relevant for Hektish. What happens if the guy decides he's not giving a fifth? In other words, is the fifth sort of an additional payment, or is it part of the redemption itself? How do we view the fifth? Does the fifth is a fifth or an ma'akev? Does that mean, in other words, it's an integral part of redeeming? Part of redeeming means add a fifth. Or no, it's two separate things. Redeem it for the principal, and you also have to add a fifth. So Gemara explains. One second. Okay. Do we say that the value of 4 is redeemed for 4 coins? And he has a personal obligation to add a fifth. And if that's the case, then a fifth is not a requirement. Or do we say or do we say the definition of redeeming 4 is 5? So it's an integral part of the redemption of either Meiser Sheni or of Hektish, the temple funds. One second. Okay, Ravinus. Ravinus says, Toshma, let's examine this. Hadmai, ein lo chaimesh ve'ein lo bia. Okay, what does this mean? Dmai, like we said before, is foodstuffs that is otherwise obligated in the whole category of tithes of truma, meiser sheni. However, we don't know if those items had the tithes removed or not, if truma meiser was taken off or not. So dmai ein lo chaimesh ve'ein lo bia. So when you redeem the meiser sheni of dmai, you take off meiser sheni, but you don't have to add on that. The Eloi beer, and you okay, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds of what beer is, but let's say that every 3 years there's a confession. So like we explained, there's a 7-year Shemitah cycle, right? Years 1, 2, 4, and 5 are Meiser Sheni years. You have to bring them into Jerusalem. Years 3 and 6 are Meiser Ani years. Then the same tithe is given to the poor instead of being brought to Jerusalem. Every 3 years, you sort of make a confession that you've fulfilled the obligations of which you were obligated for the past 3 years. So you're a farmer, you're basically affirming that the past 3 years have been proper. Okay, so you do not make this confession on Dmai, because we don't know if it's obligated in Trumas and Meiser at all. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Okay, so the Gemara says, HaKaren Yeshlai. However, if you want to, so you take off Meiser Sheni on Dmai. Again, Dmai is that which is doubtful whether or not Meiser Sheni was taken off or not. So you take it off again, regardless. And you don't need to add a fifth, but you do need to redeem the principal. My time, I'm carrying the mak of the rice, east of the Rabbanon. If I'm Mishlan mak of the rice, less of the Rabbanon. Now, if a fifth is an integral part of redemption, how could the rabbi say you don't require a fifth? A fifth principle is a fifth. In other words, if a fifth was an absolute requirement, then in order to redeem any meiser, you would need to add a fifth. So how is it that you can exempt yourself by only redeeming the keren, the principle? How could the rabbis be lenient when there's only a rabbinical obligation to redeem, and say, you only have to redeem the principal. If there's no such thing as redeeming the principal without adding an additional fifth. Clearly, in this case, the proof of the matter is that a fifth is considered an extra component. And the rabbi said, look, it's a question. We don't know. Therefore, we exempt you from the extra component. Okay. So Gemara says it's a good proof. Gemara says, let's say there's a Tanakh debate about this subject. What's the debate? A guy gives the principal, but doesn't give the fifth. Rabbi Eliezer says, you can eat it. Rabbi Shua says, you can't eat it. Okay. Now, clearly, Rabbi Eliezer says you can eat the redeemed food even though the fifth wasn't added. Rabbi Shua says you can't. Okay. Now Rabbi tries to make a compromise here. Rabbi Yehudah also says, Rabbi Eliezer b'Shabbos Rabbi Shua b'Chag. I prefer Rabbi Eliezer's opinion to be lenient on Shabbos, and Rabbi Shua's opinion to be stringent during the weekday. In other words, on Shabbos, that you can't put the money on a coin, so you have no choice in the matter. So therefore, we can be lenient like Rabbi Eliezer. But during the week, where you can redeem it, so go add a fifth and follow the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua. Okay. Now, Rebbe is offering a compromise opinion, but clearly Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua don't hold to that compromise. Clearly, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua don't disagree with Rabbi's opinion. My love must be they're disagreeing in this question that we're discussing. Rabbi Eliezer says that a chaimish is not necessary, and that's why if you redeem the principal, you can eat the food, because the chaimish is your personal obligation, not a requirement. But Rabbi Yeshua says that you cannot eat the food without adding a fifth. It's because he holds that a chaimish is an integral part of the redemption. So Amar Papa, so Papa says, no, not necessarily. Papa proposes the debate here has nothing to do with the chaimish. It could be that everybody holds it is not necessary to add a fifth. What's the concern here? Rabbi Yeshua says, I'm going to make a rabbinical decree. Why is this? Because I don't want people to forget to add the fifth. So I'm going to say, even though you aren't required to add the fifth, the rabbi said you can't eat it until you add a fifth, to make sure that the guy is not going to be negligent and not add it. And Rabbi Yehudah also says, you're right, but we're not going to make that decree on Shabbos. One opinion says we're concerned of gross negligence, that the fellow in question will not redeem what he's supposed to redeem. And the other opinion says, no, we're not concerned for this type of negligence, and therefore you can eat the food right away. So Amar Vechan says, okay, 1 second. Okay, so Vechan here says, look, hektish, redeeming a donation to the temple fund, has the same requirement of adding a chaimish. Says Rabbi Yochanan, if the entire debate here is a question of whether or not the guy will be negligent and not add a fifth at a later point, by hektish we don't have this concern. Why is that? Because hektish has a treasurer, and what's the treasurer going to do? He's going to scream at the guy publicly until he gives the fifth. So therefore, there's no concern that he's going to be lazy and not add a fifth, because if he's lazy and not add a fifth, well, he'll have to pay the price of being lazy. So there's no concern. Accordingly, everybody holds that you can redeem the principal and you can add the fifth at a later point. And there's no concern he won't give it because he'll have people chasing him down to get that extra fifth. So Gemara says, yeah, is that the case? Is that so obvious that everybody agrees that you don't need a fifth when you redeem hektish? Gemara says it's not obvious. But like Pligi Valtanya, we learned in the Bryce, and Nosan is a Karen V'Nosan Afsachayim. Rabbi Eliezer Mechil V'Chamar Mleichil. Same Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says you redeemed the principal donate. So you donated a horse to hektish. You donated your horse. You redeemed just the horse, but you didn't add a fifth. Rabbi Eliezer says, fine, go use the horse. And the rabbis say, lo yechilo, still hektish. You can't use the horse until you add the fifth. You add a 25% payment. Okay, so Rabbi comes in, of course, and makes a compromise. I agree with Rabbi Eliezer with regard to hektish. It's true, the laws of hektish, in effect, the laws of hektish do not require you to pay a fifth immediately. It's not an integral part of redemption. However, he agrees with different Chum Meiser, he agrees with the rabbis by Meiser. Meaning that by Meiser, you do have to add the fifth. And if you don't add the fifth, you can't eat the food. Okay. Mida Aminer and Rabbi Eliezer Behektish Mechal the Pligi after the Meiser. Mida Kam Nivna Kam Meiser Mechal the Inner Pligi after the Behektish. Because Rebbe's making this compromised position, clearly Rebbe's indicating that both the rabbis and Rabbi Eliezer disagree with him fundamentally. Because they both disagree. In other words, Rabbi Eliezer says both Hektish and Meiser. You don't need a fifth. And the rabbis say both Meiser and Hektish, you do need a fifth. Otherwise, you can't eat it or you can't use it. So clearly there is a debate. So how can Rabbi Yehudah say there's no debate with regard to Hektish? Because by Hektish we have the treasurers chasing down anyone who doesn't give a fifth. Clearly the rabbinical opinion here, the rabbis, the Chachamim, clearly disagree with that. They clearly imply that by Hektish, you do have to give a fifth, otherwise it's not redeemed. Okay, the Gemara says you're right. We have to rephrase Rabbi Yehudah. This is the correct way to understand Rabbi Yehudah. Okay. In other words, Rabbi Yehudah says, look, on Shabbos we can be lenient. Why? First of all, because on Shabbos is a mitzvah. Shabbos should be a delight. It should be enjoyable. So we have a reason for leniency. We want people to be able to use their stuff on Shabbos. So for example, if the guy donated to Hektish his challah board or something, then he should be able to use it on Shabbos. If the treasurer, and also because the treasurers are going to chase him down and make sure he pays make sure that he pays the fifth. So therefore, we're lenient on Shabbos. The rabbis agree that there's room for leniency even on Shabbos. Whatever, specifically on Shabbos. Meaning, the rabbis say that in general, both Hektish and Meiser, the rabbi's opinion is that even though a chaimish is not an integral part of redemption, you don't need to pay the chaimish, but the rabbis enacted a law that says you can't use the item or you can't consume the ma'aser sheni until you add the chaimish, because we're concerned you're not going to add it. However, on Shabbos, because on Shabbos you want to be lenient because you want people to enjoy their Shabbos, and because we know that the tax collector is going to give them a hard time, the hektish gizbarim, the treasurers of hektish are going to give them a hard time. So therefore, on Shabbos, the rabbis were lenient in their decree, and you're allowed to use the items of hektish on Shabbos. Okay, Amr hektish einem estal al hakarka. Rabbi Kamma points out that hektish cannot be. 1 second here. Okay, yeah. You can't redeem hektish with property. So you can redeem hektish with any type of money, but not with property. You can't put, so in other words, you have a horse, you can't redeem the horse with property, to put the hektish on the property. You have to give money, kesef. Hold on. So what's the deal with the fifth? You have the horse, it's worth $1,000. You have to add a fifth. That's $250, like we explained. So can the $250 come from property? Truma eina mishtalamis element achulin. Derachmona amar v'nasan like kainetz akaidish. Davar royly is kaidish. Let's explain this. Let's say a guy eats truma by mistake, by accident. So the atonement is to give back the principal. So let's say he eats a $100 fruit platter from truma. So he gives $100 plus 25, and he also has to bring a sacrifice called an osham. Now, what about? So okay, now what happens when so the guy comes back to the kohen and he gives him the $125 for the truma that he ate by mistake, by accident. The rule is that $125 becomes truma. It turns into truma. So the client buys another fruit platter with it. He treats that second fruit platter as if it was truma. So in other words, the Yisrael, the one who stole the truma and ate it without permission by accident, he pays back chulin, non-consecrated, and then it turns into truma once he gives it to the kohen. Because it says, the items he must pay is chulin. And here's the question. What about the fifth? The $100, that turns into truma immediately. But what about the fifth? Could I give the kohen that which is already truma? This rule that the payment turns into truma, is that in effect only on the principal or also on the fifth? Similarly, Meiser Einem Ischal al Hasimain. He explained that a simain is sort of a blank token, right? So it's there's no imprint. It's not engraved. Meiser must be redeemed on an engraved coin. What about the fifth? So Meiser Einem Ischal al Hasimain the Meiser must be on Vitzarta Kesef, a coin with an imprint. Chumshai, when the third wide line now of 54a. Chumshai Maushi Ischal al Hasimain. What about the fifth? Can we redeem the fifth onto an Hasimain, a blank coin? So it's Galgalmul. So this question was floating around the rabbis. Everyone was asking the question. Nobody had a good answer. And then the question got to Rava. So Rava says, Amar Kra Olav, the rabbi is Chumshai Kamaisei. The Yosef Kamishise Olav, you add a fifth to the principal. What does that mean? That means that the fifth has the same rule as the principal. Just like the principal requires a coin that's imprinted, so to the fifth requires an imprinted coin as well. Currency, not just a blank piece of bullion. Amar Ravinus says, we learn like this in the Bryce as well. One second. Okay, so here's the deal. A robber stole truma. He stole the fruit platter of the kohen. It was worth $50. He's a nighttime robber. So how much does he pay? He pays 100. Now, there's just one catch here. The catch is that because he stole truma, he can pay back the kohen with a platter of truma. He doesn't have to give him a platter of chulin, that which isn't truma. He gives him back truma. Achla, let's say he eats it. Mishalam shnei kronim b'chaimish. He pays back 2 principals plus a fifth. We'll explain in a moment. Karen b'chaimish mechulin, v'karen d'mei truma. Okay, so now what happened? He stole it at nighttime and he ate it. Okay, for stealing, he pays twice. Now that double payment could be paid from truma. However, for eating, the rule is if you eat truma by accident, what's the rule? You pay back one and a fifth from chulin, from that which is not truma, and it turns into truma. So similarly here also, you can pay back the double payment that can be made from truma, but the payment of 1 and a fifth, that has to be from chulin. Well, we see clearly here that the fifth has the same rule as the principal. Before we asked it as a question, does the fifth need to be the same as the principal? Now we're answering, Shema Mina, we see from here, we're now 54b, top of the page, that the fifth of truma is exactly the same as the principal. And Shema Mina, it's a good proof that both of them are required to be chulin, to be regular food that is not truma. Amarova. So Rava says, Gabi Gezel Ksiv Chamishisav Yosef Olav. Okay, now we get to robbery. So we have a lot of fifths here, right? We have the fifth of Meiser Sheni, we have the fifth of eating truma by accident, fifth of redeeming hektish. Now we get to another fifth. This is the fifth of Asham Gezelis. What happened? The guy stole and lied under oath about his robbery. So Gabi Gezel Ksiv Chamishisav Yosef Olav, the payment for lying under oath about a robbery is add a fifth and bring a sacrifice, an Asham. Which now we learned, not only as the Karen V'nishbaloi al HaChaimish, Hareza Mosef Chaimish al HaChaimish, Achi Yismael HaKaren Pachas Mishav Pruta. Okay. Now, so what happened? The guy lied under oath, and then he kept lying about the fifth, right? So he stole an item for $100, right? Then he lied about it under oath, so he pays back 120. So he paid the guy 100, and then he lies about the 20. He makes a false oath again. Turns out it was false. So now he owes him $20 plus another fifth of 20, which is 5. right? And then he lies about the 5. So now he owes the 5 plus another fifth of the 5, which is $1.25. I'm sorry. $1.25. $1.25 is a quarter of, so another $1.25. Now he lies about $1.25. So what does he owe now? $1.25 plus the additional roughly 41 cents. 31 cents, I'm sorry. 31 cents. Then he lies about the 31 cents. So now how much does he have to pay? About 7 cents. Let's say for argument's sake that 7 cents isn't a pruta. So at that point he stops paying. At that point, the fifth, he can no longer pay the fifth because it's less than a shavar pruta. Okay. Until the principal becomes less than a shavar pruta. I'm sorry, so he can lie about the 30 cents, but then he can't lie about the 7 cents. Because the 7 cents is insignificant. Okay, 1 second. Okay, Pachas Mishav Pruta. Okay. Pachas Mishav Pruta Gabe Truma Ksiv. 1 second. Okay, Gabe Truma Ksiv, with regard to Truma, it says, Ish Kiyev HaKadosh B'Shgaga V'Yosef Chamishisei Olav. A person eats Truma by accident, he has to add a fifth. Now we learn, Ta'aychel Truma B'Shayid, Misham Karen V'Chamish. Echad Aychel V'Echad Shaisa, Echad Atzach, Echad Truma Tahara, Echad Truma Tmeah. This is true if you consume it by eating it, by drinking it, also by smearing it. So let's say he has oil and he smears the oil on his body. This is, by the way, let me make this very clear here. Smearing is not like eating, except with regard to truma, and a specific subset of laws. And the reason for this is because a kohen is allowed to use truma for anything. That is normal. And because it's normal to use oil for smearing, so therefore, this constitutes a normal misuse of truma, because the guy is not allowed to eat it, or not allowed to smear it, and therefore he has to add on a fifth. And this is true whether the truma is tahar, fit for consumption by a kohen, or if it's truma tmeah, it's not fit for consumption by a kohen. The rule is mishalom chumshi, you pay a fifth, and the chumshi the chumsha, if you ate the fifth, so in other words, the guy ate he ate 10 apples for the kohen, right? So he gave the kohen 12 and a half apples back. And all those 12 and a half apples now turn into truma, right? And what did he do? He ate one of those 2.5 for the fifth. He ate one of those 2.5 apples. Now he has to add an apple plus a fifth of an apple. Okay, with regard to the laws of Meiser, with regard to the laws of Meiser, nobody mentions this possibility of adding a fifth to a fifth. Okay, yeah. It seems like the sort of the method of how this was done is that, let's say the guy redeemed Meiser Sheni, he added a fifth, and then he bought fruit with that money, with that fifth. Does he have to redeem it again and add another fifth? So we don't know. It's never addressed. Gabi Hektish, with regard to the laws of Hektish, it says the Imam Hektish Yigolas based of Yosef Chamishis Kesef Erka. Hektish Meisef Chaimish Chumsha. With regard to Hektish, the redemption of Hektish, we have the same process of adding multiple fifths. Okay, in other words, the guy adds a fifth, paid to Hektish, then he misuses that extra fifth that was given to Hektish, then he has to give another fifth on top of the fifth. Okay. 1 second. Hold on 1 second. I'm sorry. I misspoke. With regard to Hektish, Meisef Chaimish, he adds a fifth. Chumsha Tnan, Chumsha Loy Tnan. But with regard to Hektish, it says you add a fifth, but it doesn't say you add a fifth to the fifth. In other words, let's say he misuses that fifth that he gave back to Hektish. Does he have to add an additional fifth, like we said by robbery? Right? He kept on lying about the fifth. He keeps on adding another fifth. Is that true with regard to Hektish as well? Maya, what's the story? Gabi Truma, with regard to the laws of Truma, Ksiva Yosef, it says you add. Gabi Hektish Nami Ksiva Yosef. With regard to Hektish, it also says you add, meaning, just like with regard to Truma, you can add multiple fifths. So too, that same rule should be in effect with regard to Truma. 1 second. Okay, 1 second. Dilma, or do you say the point of the verse is not the vayasaf, it's not the adding. 1 second. It says, and you should add the vav. This is a process the Gemara will now talk about, which is called Geirin and Masif and Darshan. And Rashi points out the critical feature of this, which we'll explain in a moment, is as follows. And again, I'm limiting here this to Rashi's explanation, which is that you can take, if you have a combination of words, you can subtract words from the beginning or the end of the words and move those words around. You think it's like a Scrabble game sort of, but you can only move the front or the back letter. You can attach it to a different letter. So you take the vav of v'yasaf, and you should add, and you add it to the word chamishisai. And what you get is chamishisav. You get plural. You get many fifths. This is a process called. This is one of the methods of interpreting the text, called Geirin and Masif and Darshan. So Ishak will say the vav de v'yasaf. You take the vav off the word v'yasaf. V'shadas le'al chamishisai. And you add it to the word chamishisai, havalei chamishisav. You get plural, you get multiple fifths. Gabi hektish siv yosef chamishis. It says add, the word is chamishis. You don't get the plural. You only get its fifth belonging to it. So you don't, in other words, the Gemara is proposing two methods of how we know that Truma has multiple fifths. Either it's because we use the word v'yasaf, and you should add, meaning you should add multiple fifths, or the concept called Geirin and Masif and Darshan, where you subtract the letter and put it on the end of the word. By Truma, you add the letter to the end of the word, you get a plural. By hektish, you get belonging to it, not a plural of the word fifth. So maybe you wouldn't add multiple fifths. Okay, so the Gemara now has a fundamental question. This is probably something that you've been thinking yourself. I think one of you certainly made a face about this. Hold on a second. The guy has a $100 horse, right? He gives it to Hektish. He redeems it for 125. So however you understand this, he gave $25 now to Hektish. If he misuses that $25, right? So he gives Hektish 125. He steals from the guy the $25 back, and goes and spends it. Well, forget about the fact that it's a fifth. It belongs now to Hektish. Who cares whether it was a fifth when it was donated? Right now, it belongs to Hektish. If it belongs to Hektish, then you should have to redeem it. In other words, why are we focusing on the fact that it was given because of a fifth? Ultimately speaking, it belongs to Hektish. The rule is if you misuse anything of Hektish, you have to add a fifth. And that includes any money of Hektish, including the $25. Why is it important with how Hektish got the money? So it's a second level hektish. In other words, it's not a primary hektish. A primary hektish would be, I donate my cow to hektish, or I donate my horse to hektish. That's primary. That's called the hektish rishon. This is the hektish sheni. I didn't donate. I didn't declare it hektish. I just gave it because I got a penalty. But why isn't that sufficient to require a redemption? But Amr Rishuma Levi says, the hektish rishon ma'aseh chaimish, al hektish sheni ein ma'aseh chaimish. Okay, so the Gemara says, according to Rishuma Levi, hektish sheni, you don't add a chaimish to. I'm sorry. So the Gemara's question is, clearly the Brisa has already resolved this. Rabbi Shua has explained that you don't, hektish sheni, you don't add a fifth, meaning there's only 1/5 for hektish. You don't add multiple fifths. In other words, because it was donated to hektish in the manner of hektish sheni, it wasn't donated directly, only as a payment. So therefore, you don't have to add a fifth. So we've resolved the question. So the Gemara says, Rav explained that the question revolved around whether or not giving a chaimish is considered, do we consider the chaimish like the original item? So it wouldn't be hektish sheni, it would be hektish rishon. That's sort of the question. Is it a first level hektish? Is it as if you directly sanctified it? Or is it a second level hektish? Amar Daf Yomi Bava. One second. Okay, I'm sorry. My Havala. What's the final resolution here? So I'm going to do Shmei Abaya. I'm Rav Yosef Hamishis Kesef Erkachol Makash Chumshay Kesef Erkach Makesef Erkach Ma'aseh Chaimish Af Kesef Chumshay Nami Ma'aseh Chaimish. The verse says you add the fifth to the principal. What does that mean? It means to say that the fifth becomes just like the principal. Just like the principal is considered a first level hektish, and therefore it is eligible for a fifth to be paid on it. So to the fifth it gets the same status. Okay, let's continue. Gufa, the original Gemara. Let's focus on the original statement of Rabbi Shmuel Levi. Al hektish rishon ma'aseh chaimish, al hektish sheni ein ma'aseh chaimish. On the original hektish, you add a fifth. 1 second. Al hektish sheni, on a second level hektish, you do not add a fifth. 1 second. One second. Okay. So okay. One more thing to point out here. According to Rashi, you have a very interesting feature here. So what happens? The guy gives his horse to Hektish, right? Then he redeems his horse for it's $100 horse. He redeems it for 125. Okay. So what happens here? The principal is Hektish Sheni. I never sanctify the principal directly. I sanctify the horse. So the principal is Hektish Sheni. You would not pay a fifth on the principal. But because the fifth is as if it's Tchilas Hektish, as if it's the beginning, you would add a fifth on the fifth, but not a fifth on the principal. So you pay Hektish $125, right? You give the guy 100 and they give him 25. If you misuse the 100, that's called Hektish Sheni, and therefore you return the money as you misused it. But the fifth is Hektish. The fifth is considered attached to the original horse, and therefore the fifth is considered. The Gemara's possibility for the question, consider the fifth to be as if it was the original horse, and therefore you would pay a fifth on the fifth. That was sort of the question. Okay, so now we get to Rabbi Shmuel Levi. Rabbi Shmuel Levi says on the original principle, because it's hektish sheni, meaning it wasn't directly sanctified, so then you do not pay a fifth on that money. Amar Rav explains, my time Rabbi Shmuel Levi. What's the reason of Rabbi Shmuel Levi? The verse says in hamakdish yigolas pesach hamakdish le'hamakdish. Okay, meaning when the Torah speaks of redeeming hektish, it speaks of the one who sanctified his house. Okay, what does that mean? You have to directly sanctify it. You have to say this horse is hektish. But if the horse, on the other hand, was redeemed, you didn't directly sanctify it. This is called matfis. Matfis means you're sort of transferring the value of hektish, right? So, for example, you have a hektish item here. You say, I want the value of this to be here. So you have the horse, right? You say the value of this horse now should go on to this $100. That's called matfis. Matfis does not add a fifth. Okay, 1 second. Okay. So the matfis does not a fifth, and that's any hektish sheni. Any hektish sheni is sort of moving the sanctification. So you're moving the sanctification from the horse onto the money. That's called matfis, not makdish. And matfis doesn't add a fifth. The Torah specifically requires you to deliberately sanctify it. You have to be makdish. Matfis doesn't pay a fifth. Tanitani kamed Rabbi Lozer. So there was an author there, somebody who had a good memory. He said in front of Rabbi Lozer, if somebody sanctifies a non-kosher animal, like a horse, you redeem it for its value. What's unique about a horse is that the horse is sanctified. The kula l'shamayim, it all goes now to the temple, and you can misuse it, and you get a penalty for its misuse. We'll explain that in a moment. Anything that's in that same category initially becomes sanctified. It entirely belongs to hektish. Then if you misuse it, you get a penalty. So Rabbi Lozer says to the author, okay, what does it mean it's entirely belonging to God? This excludes kachim kalam. What is that? These are sacrifices, for example, like the korban pesach. The korban pesach is considered kachim kalam, meaning that people they can partake in the pesach. You are not moyel in kachim kalam. Misusing kachim kalam does not incur the penalty of me'ilah. Because the owners own a portion of the animal, there's no penalty for misuse. Okay, fine. So what does it mean that initially becomes sanctified. What does that mean? What does it mean? Something that was initially sanctified does not have me'ilah. But if it was at the end sanctified at the end, we'll explain. This typically means that there was a cycle, meaning there was a matfis. Somebody moved the sanctification from one thing to the other one. Let's say me'ilah, there's no penalty for its misuse. 1 second. Now, this is sort of a rhetorical question, because let's say, for example, you move the sanctification onto an animal that is eligible for a sacrifice, then you would be mild. So, for example, you have the horse, you move the horse onto $100, then you move the $100 onto a sacrifice, onto a young ox, then you could be mild in the young ox. And in general, the verse here is not even talking about me'ilah; it's talking about redemption. The Gemara explains, you're talking about redeeming to a fifth, meaning, and this is exactly like we're saying with Rabbi Shimon Levi, like the opinion of Rabbi Shimon Levi, meaning that makdish, if you directly sanctify something, so then there's a penalty of me'ilah, and if you redeem it, you must add a fifth. However, if it's saif hektish, if you're matfis, meaning you're moving the sanctification of the animal from one animal onto the money, or then somewhere else maybe, then there is no me'ilah, meaning obviously you could misuse it, and you might incur a penalty for misusing it. But if you misuse it, the penalty would not include adding a fifth, because adding a fifth is only when you directly sanctify the item. If you misuse the horse, you would have to pay a penalty. But if you misuse the money that the horse was redeemed for, that's not makdish, that's matfis. Again, makdish is to sanctify it directly. Matfis is to move the sanctification from the horse to the money. There's no penalty of a fifth when you misuse the money that was matfis, not the money that was, as opposed to misusing something that was makdish, where you would get a penalty of the fifth. So I'm like, in Hafik Amnes, he said, yeah, that's exactly what I meant to say. Okay, we'll leave off here. Have a chakoshav sameach. Thank you again for the gift. Very, very kind of you. And Rabbi Brown will lead off tomorrow.